This is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster, as you will have been seeing this morning. Well, time for more daily debate, and given yesterday's decision at the High Court, it felt only right and proper to stage a Brexit rematch for the victorious 52%. Defeated yesterday in the High Court, it would seem, the former Cabinet Minister, Theresa Villiers MP, and for the defeated 48%, victorious at the High Court, Paddy Ashdown, Lord Ashdown of the Liberal Democrats, and indeed the European movement. Paddy Ashdown, it seems to me there's a lot of Sturm and Drang around about all of this, but it all centres...
A lot of hypocrisy to it.
Well, yeah, but it all centres on this essential question. Do you, as someone who thinks Britain made a mistake in that referendum, see the insertion of the House of Lords and the House of Commons into the process as a chance to cancel what the British people voted for?
No. And I don't think anybody else sensible does either. I mean, look, this was a referendum supposedly fought, probably sincerely fought, on the issue of the sovereignty of Parliament. Now the Prime Minister has told us that she doesn't agree with the sovereignty of Parliament. She grabs that all for herself. And she is determined to push this through without consulting Parliament, and the courts have told her, shame that she had to be told the courts, that's not the way we do democracy in Britain.
But you do feel that on the central issue of triggering Article 50, leaving the European Union, that Parliament's hands are tied?
Well, the government puts that to Parliament. I don't think it's up to Parliament to frustrate this in the main, but I think it's up to Parliament to do what it always...
So you wouldn't vote to frustrate it personally?
I don't think anybody will vote to frustrate it, but on the other hand, Parliament has a role. It has a role which will be exercised, for instance, through introducing amendments. And you can think about what those might be. None of those need to in any way affect or expose the Prime Minister's bargaining hand. She can tell us what destination she's going for. Parliament has a role to play in the process. That's what the courts have said. I'm shocked that the Prime Minister of our country didn't seem to realise that. Our democracy is built on the executive under the control of Parliament, and Parliament will exercise that duty. And let me just say that in that process, properly handled, I believe you can come to a constructive outcome without too much delay. It depends on whether the government will treat Parliament with contempt, in which case it's going to get a pretty dusty ride, or treat it as a constructive force that will come to a right conclusion for the British people.
Now, he is being painted as one of the leading villains in all of this, but having heard what he's got to say, what problem do you have with all this?
Well, I think it's completely wrong of him to say that the Prime Minister is somehow sort of disregarding the sovereignty of Parliament. The government ran a perfectly reasonable legal argument that Article 50 is a matter of an international treaty, and for many hundreds of years English law has enabled the government to use the prerogative powers in relation to the making and unmaking of international treaties.
I'm not a legal expert, nor apparently is the Attorney General or the Prime Minister, but I mean the judges have ruled, and if it's not going to stop Brexit, which Lord Ashdown has just assured you it's not, what's the problem?
Well, I think if the Supreme Court do uphold this decision, the important thing is for Parliament swiftly to table Article 50 according to the timetable set out by the government. If that happens, there isn't a problem. Absolutely.
So do you think it's justified to have the sort of abuse that's been levelled at the courts in the newspapers this morning?
No, I wouldn't sort of endorse those comments. I think that the judges did make a decision about process. I think it's right for the government to appeal. You know, I find their arguments convincing. But when it comes down to it, if the judges do believe that Article 50 can't be tabled without a parliamentary vote, then the important thing is that Lord Ashdown and his colleagues commit to voting to table Article 50 and respecting the result of the referendum.
You're very clever, Theresa, because you're actually putting words into my mouth. A parliamentary process, which will include a vote, but it also includes Parliament holding the executive to account, introducing amendments, having them debated. I don't think that need necessarily delay this. Nobody is in the business of trying to counteract the will of the British people. Here's the point, as I think I put it in a sentence, if I may, Adam, which is, look, the British people have voted for a departure. We accept that. They have not voted for a destination. And in arguing what destination we get to, huge amounts of jobs, the reputation of the country, the nature of our country will depend on that. It is right that Parliament should have a process in determining what the destination is in the interests of the British people. That's all that's being asked for. It's normal parliamentary practice. And I'm frankly amazed that a Conservative government under this Prime Minister hasn't recognised what the courts told it had to be done. And I think the government will simply look ridiculous if it now goes to the Supreme Court saying that Parliament in our democracy should have no say. That's a ludicrous position to be in.
Of course it won't look ridiculous. Apart from anything else, we've got a court judgment in Northern Ireland which operates on a very different basis and seems to assume that Article 50 is the prerogative of the government. But either way, I mean, my question for you is, will you commit to ensuring Article 50 can be tabled by March?
Just on that, it wasn't the judgment in Northern Ireland to do with accepting that this was a decision that was taken collectively by the UK, which is totally different, isn't it? It wasn't that
completely different. And I mean, you simply can't use that argument. But look, let's come back to Theresa's central question, which is the central one. Will we frustrate Article 50 being presented and being passed? No. No sensible Democrat. You know, I felt bereft when we took that decision, but the British people are my master, and I obey them in the ballot box, whether I like it or not. On the other hand, there is a parliamentary process to go through, and that parliamentary process should include the introductions of amendments and checking the government and making sure that we know what the destination is and making sure that they're doing the right thing in the public interest. And I think this process will be easily handled if the government respects Parliament, if it treats Parliament with contempt. By the way, the Parliaments of Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, as they have done so far. The body language in this has been very bad so far. If they treat it with contempt, they're going to get a very rough ride.
Well, it's absolutely, there's nothing to say that the government has in any way treated Parliament with contempt.
So you don't think,
but there hasn't been a day that's gone by since the 24th of June when Parliament hasn't been talking about Brexit and debating Brexit. Of course, Parliament is going to be involved every step of the way. What it shouldn't be allowed to do is to tie the government's negotiating hand or force the government to set out that hand at a too early a stage.
It's not going to do that. But do you really believe that the Prime Minister saying Parliament will not have a vote on Article 50 is not seen justifiably as treating Parliament with contempt? Parliament has a role in this process. The judges have confirmed that. The government will look utterly ridiculous now if it goes to the Supreme Court saying Parliament has no role in passing a piece of legislation that affects every person in this country. It's an unsustainable position.
But there are some political realities, and one of them is the timetable. We know that the Europeans want Britain to get on with it. We know that Theresa May has said that she wants to have the process completed by March 2019, and we know there's a very good reason for that. But if this gets into Parliament, that whole timetable could be blown out the window. We could find ourselves in a ridiculous position of electing MEPs who last for...
You can always produce a ridiculous outcome by taking a ridiculously extreme position. I think you must rely on Parliament to act in a sensible fashion, and I've laid out how it can do so. And yes, we'd all like to see this period of uncertainty as short as possible. But frankly, you know, Brexit is forever. Forever. The damage that is done to British lives in this country, if it takes a little longer to get to the right decision in the national interest by going through a parliamentary process, for goodness sake, let's do so.
Well, we're almost destined to go through a parliamentary process anyway, because Parliament is the body that will repeal the 72 European Communities
Thanks to the High Court, they have taught the government that it really cannot overrule Parliament in this matter or ignore Parliament.
Just a final question. Early election to get around this, would you favour that?
No, I think we've got a huge task ahead of us. We need to focus on those negotiations to accept and implement the referendum rather than get tied up in a general election.
Early election might leave.
I don't think she wants it, but well, let's wait and see. I don't think she wants it, but I don't think she can probably avoid it. She'll be forced to this. I think not certainty, but there's the probability curve now rises sharply towards an election in May.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed.